Welcome to part two of Project One. I was going to pause the video and it accidentally saved it and ended the recording, so I figured, well, I'll just make that part one and I'll make a part two. And this is part two. If you've watched part one, we've already built our project. This is what you should see. Now, this is what's called the design view or the designer. These are class objects or an objects of a class, the Windows form class. uh, Whenever you put things on here and then run the program, it's instantiating from this. You're never really running what you see, but you will see in your project what you see here. So if you try to move this around when it's running, it's going to pop up in another window. So this is going to be a completely different object at that point. Okay, so keep that in mind. If you select this object, you'll see the properties window over here. All right. All objects have properties and methods. Properties define an object. We're objects in the object-oriented world. We have properties like gender, height, weight, hair color, eye color, that sort of thing. Some of them change, some of them don't. All right? Your gender is not going to change. You may change it on the outside, but from the DNA, it's still going to be what it's going to be. So, in that regard, this is a fixed read-only property. That's my point. All right. Um, your age changes, right? Your eye color doesn't change. You can put in contacts, but your real eye color from a DNA standpoint is always fixed. All right. Hair color can change. Weight can change. You can do a lot of things to those properties. Some of them are read write. That means you can change some of them. Some of them are read only. That means you can't change them. You can only read from them. The object stores those properties. The other part of this mixture is what we call methods, or what we call methods. Methods are simply tasks that do something to themselves or other objects. All right. Let's go back to the human example again, the human object. As a human, I have all sorts of methods. I have a talk method, which I'm running right now. I have a think method, a sneeze method, an eat method, do number one and number two method, run, walk, cry, scream, whatever. All of those are methods. All of them. Okay. And every human pretty much has the same set of methods because we all come from, two parents. Now, in the object-oriented world, in this particular world, it used to be multiple parents. You could have 15 parents. Well, they've simplified all that, thank goodness, because it's terrible when you start trying to backtrack hierarchically where something came from. Now it's one parent to one child, pretty much. So this is my parent form, and from that, I will inherit a child. It will have all the methods and properties that this parent has. That means that anything I put in here, any buttons, any controls I put on here, any code I put in these event handlers, my child will have exactly the same thing. All right, so you got to kind of start thinking that way. All right, now let's go over here. So here's our properties window. Now, if you don't have this selected, if you have a button or something selected, which we don't have anything right now, these properties will change depending on what you have selected. Now, this views the properties, and there's the methods, or the events, we might call them. These are event handlers. Now, I don't like Form 1 as the default name for this form. Why is that? Because if somebody else is a big project and other people are working on it, and they will be, Form 1 doesn't tell them anything. It's not descriptive, and that's what we go for when we're looking at object names. Just like variable names, they have to have some meaning. Well, if you look at my little handout, I'm going to right click on this. Hopefully it'll let me rename this. Go to rename. You want to leave the .vb on there. Now you can also do this down here. I think VB does them both once you change one. You start off with a prefix, FRM. It's usually 3 letters. That tells the person this is a form of some kind. Now, we only have one form, and this is not a multi-form application, so I'm going to put just main. It is the main form, and my A key is going crazy on this machine. All right, and I just rename it. It says here, you're renaming a file. Would you like to also perform a rename on this project to all references and code? Yes. Otherwise, you'll have to go and do it manually, so you want to click yes. All right. Now let's click it again, select it. If it'll let me. There we go. It goes. Now you see that the name of the object has changed. All right. Let's see if I can get these to do alphabetically a different way. All right. Now, there are a bunch of different properties for every object. Some have more. This is the name of the object. Okay, notice up here it still says Form 1. Well, there's a text property for most of these objects. If you scroll down, you'll see the text property. Most of the time in the caption bar. You want to change that, obviously. I'm just going to call this Hello World because that's what it does. Whoops, I meant that to be not a 1. Okay, now, notice over here, it's picked that up, Hello World. Now, keep this in mind too. A lot of the times you'll be changing these properties while your application is running. Some of the times you can set things up when it's static like this in design view, but you can also manipulate these properties during runtime, so your program can be pretty smart in that regard, or you can make your program smart. All right. Let's go up to start position. I always want you to start, unless it's a special multi-form application where you need tiled forms in the screen or whatever. Don't use Windows default. Always set it to center screen. So these are the things you're going to always be doing unless I tell you differently. All right. Now let's press Control S to save this project, or you can come up here to these multiple floppies that save all. If you've got a bunch of different code windows open and you're making changes to each one, if you just click this, it will only save the contents of the one that you're working on at the moment. If you want to save them all, just click this or press Control S. I always save everything. That's just that way you don't miss anything. All right, now let's look at this menu here. It says Build and Debug. All right, notice that my default configuration for this particular setup is debug. Now it's going to put debug code in your code so that you can step through and examine things. When you get ready to release an application and out into the wild for the public consumption, you'll want to set it to release and recompile it. What that will do is pull all that junky code out and make it really efficient and smaller. You only need that when you're working on the project. So we'll just set it to debug and leave it. All right, so what I want to do is run this thing and see how it looks. So you can press F5 or you can come up here and click it. I like to press F5. And it should just pop up a window that says Hello World in the status bar, the caption. Now notice it's compiling and linking and doing all sorts of things. This may take a little bit of time. It says Bill started. Bill succeeded. Completing the operation you requested. Running, oh, here we go. Abort. I just don't, hopefully I'm not going to have a problem with Avast blocking my running here. Let's see what happens when I do that again. There it is. Hello World. And I just minimized it, but you can see over here. Now another thing to remember, when you minimize a debug that's running and you forget it's down there and you go back to code, you try to go in and change your code, you'll forget that this is open. It's not going to let you do anything. First thing to look at, if you can't change it, is to see if you got this debug over here. If you do, you can either exit here or you can go to debug, stop debugging. I recommend you do this. Stop debugging, Shift F5. If you hit the red X, it will close it, but after a while, you may have some problems with this application. Sometimes it's supposed to delete files, and it doesn't, and it thinks they're still there and they're running, and so it gives you all sorts of weird errors. So try to get out of the habit of clicking on that red X during the debug. If you're in release and you're running the application, that's fine. All right, so we've got our form that pops up. Not very pretty on my little screen. I hope it looks better to you. Now, look, notice over here on the left, there are several of these little flyouts. You want to look at the toolbar right now, okay? We want all common controls. Or maybe I want all Windows forms. Yeah, I want all Windows forms. Common controls sort of makes it a little easier to find stuff. There's not as much stuff in here. What I want is the button, so I want to put a button on here. There's a button. What do you do with a button? You click it, right? Let's put it on there. Let's see what we get. Let's go back. All right, there's my button. I just double clicked it. You can, if you can get enough real estate, you just click, hold, and drag it over here. All right, so I'm going to select this button and move it. I'm going to put it down here. All right, notice it's selected. If I select something else, like the form, the properties for the form will come up. I want the properties for the button to come up, so I'm going to select it. Notice the default name. That's not what I want. And that's not what I want you to do. I'll always get in the habit. Don't get in a hurry and blow by this part of it. Go ahead and design the GUI, rename all the buttons and controls and objects, then start working on the functionality. All right? Because inevitably what will happen is you'll send me an application with a bunch of button 1, button 2, button 3, form 1, form 2. For every one of those, you're going to lose points. All right? You've got to get out of that habit because an employer's not going to like for you doing that. I mean, they're going to have their own standards, obviously. They won't be mine. They'll be theirs. But whatever they are, you got to get in the habit of paying attention to the minutia in this part of it. We're not talking about, you know, the logical design, the physical design. Right now, we're talking about the GUI design. It's the third part. All right. So what's the prefix for a button according to that sheet that I have that's in the student resources? BTN. If you haven't gotten hold of that, go into Blackboard, get it, print it out, keep it handy so you'll know what you're doing. What are we going to use this button for? This button is going to display a message called Hello World. So I'm just going to put button display. You can call it whatever you want. Okay, so that changed the name of the object, but not the text on the object. The name property is different from the text property. All right, okay, so we scroll down to the bottom here, and we'll see the text says button 1. I'm going to put say it on here, all right, with an exclamation point. Now there's another way, you know, there are different keystroke hotkeys and disability type ways for disabled people to use applications on a computer. But this is just mainly for quick ease of use for power users. If you'll place your cursor before the text on the object, especially a button, and put an ampersand on there, that will do the underscore on the hotkey. So they can press Alt-A, and it's just like they clicked on the button. Okay, so that's a little something to note. We'll be doing that a lot. All right, so now if I double click on this, anytime you double click on any object, it's going to take you to the default event handler and set there in the code editor waiting for you to put code in there. Now you don't have to use that. You can come over here to the events and see it setting on click. That means it's the default. I can do any of these events in here, and we'll be getting into that a lot. But just because I know I want to use the click event, and that's the default event for a button, because that's what people do, I'm going to double click on it, and it will take me into code view, create that event handler for me. All right, so what is an event handler? Notice I've got my class here. That's my form main. So this is setting inside my form object. Anytime a user does something or a program does something, it's going to send a message. Windows is, and I've got a little spiel on that. If you'll look into student resources on, you know, the object-oriented, event-driven model, and read that, it will explain this a little bit better. But what happens with a Windows application, unlike a DOS application, you know, the old static window, it's always sitting there when it's running. It's scanning the keyboard or scanning the database. It's constantly so many cycles per second, and it's using a lot of processor resources. A Windows app, on the other hand, once it loads into memory, unless something sends it a message that an event has taken place, it's just going to sit there and wait. It doesn't have to sniff anything out because Windows will send it a message code which will hit the message event handler, or what we used to call the callback function. It'll wake that application up, and it'll look for that event and see if there's an event handler for it. If it's a click event, it's going to find this and run whatever code we put in here. Now, this is a subroutine event handler, all right? So what I want to do here is I want to display a message. Now, I'm going to use an intrinsic object called a message box, all right? And it's message. Now, notice what popped up there. That will tell you, it'll show you all the available intrinsic objects or objects that you have created. Now, I want message box, and it happens to be right here. Okay, it gave me that object. I didn't have to instantiate or create it. That's just available to you. Now, there is a method for this called show. And once you hit the dot operator or the period, if it's a valid object name, it will show you the methods and events and properties available to that particular one. So this one has 3. I'm interested in show because I want to show this message box. All right. Now, all methods have to have an opening and closing paren. Now you already know this if you've taken 150. If you haven't, then you're kind of behind the ball here. It can be empty, or it can have arguments in it, right? Notice that we've got one of 21. This is what's called an overloaded object. It has 21 different instances. Now I could scroll through these and find the one I want. Some of them have icons and multiple buttons like a OK cancel, that sort of thing that you can get feedback from. But honestly, for this, I just want, one of 21. In other words, it takes one argument of type string. Okay, I want to display a string. What do I want to display? Hello world. Well, how do you delineate a string literal? As you know from your past experiences, with double quotes. Hello world. Okay? Now, in VB, you don't have any line termination characters. It just knows that that's the end of it. So you don't have to worry about it. Now, when I get into C#, I'm probably going to forget that. Let's save it again and run it and see what happens. All right. So I press F5. Should compile it. Oh, dang. Stop that. I might have to fix this before I go on. I can't keep doing it this way. Abort. I wanted to abort this, not that. Okay, good. Leave me alone then. Oh, there it is. Okay. So, okay, there's my form. Sorry about that. That's my over-imaginative virus application. So, antivirus application. It says hello world. Now, this thing's not very big, so, you know, you might have to change the size. But anyway, there it is. And there's my button, right? Say it. All right. Now, remember that I put an ampersand before the A, so I can press the Alt key, A, and it's just like I clicked on. Notice what it did. It popped up a message box. It said hello world. There's not much to it. We could dress it up if we wanted to. We could even use a second form for that and customize it. Or I can click it, and it'll say hello world. All right. Woohoo. Now you finally did something. Not all that impressive, is it? You got to start somewhere. All right, now I want to show you something else. I want to prove to you that when I click on this, what's going on, not necessarily prove to you, but indicate to you, describe to you what's going on. Now, I just set a breakpoint. We're going to get into this much later. A lot of this stuff, you know, you just have to take on face value. I'm setting a breakpoint here because I want execution to stop when it jumps into this particular subroutine. All right, so let's save it, run it again, F5 to run it. There it is. Click say it. Watch what happened. Notice there's a little arrow at that red dot. It's paused. If you press F10, you can step through each line of code in here and examine what's going on down in here. These are auto variables and objects that it's put in there. You can put your own in there too to examine the value of things as they execute, which is excellent. I don't know why these books don't talk about the debugger. I'm going to talk about it extensively. I want you to start learning about it now because it's crazy to try to debug code without this. It's just not a productive way to do it. All right, so in order to step through, it's just at the head here of the function of the subroutine. So it's going to do its thing.